Let's focus on first of all, we'll talk about we'll look at this Trump response to the nurses, and then we're going to highlight a protest that should be getting a significant amount of news attention. So we know that across the country there's a problem with ventilators, with testing kits, with any number of things. Frontline and certainly people, working in grocery stores and so on, doctors and nurses have had to make makeshift equipment for themselves. There was, especially a couple of weeks ago, there was numerous stories of nurses tying scarves around their faces, as an example. This is a major problem. And we also know that nurses have been fired in retribution for speaking about these problems. And we also know that Donald Trump absolutely doesn't care if you die or if nurses die or if anyone dies, because all he cares about is press. And we also know that they are going to push this reopening. They're trying to reset the benchmark on acceptable levels of death. And a nurse bravely speaking out in New Orleans saying that there's PPE troubles is going to upset Donald Trump. Here he is with Donald Trump and Sophie Thomas, who is the nurse. This is incredible.
So PPE has been sporadic, but it's been manageable, and we do what we have to do. We're nurses, and we learn to adapt and do whatever the best thing that we can do for our patients to get the job done and get the care provided. And that's what we're going to continue to do as COVID-19 continues.
Sporadic for you, but not sporadic for a lot of other people.
Oh, no, I agree, Mr. President.
Because I've heard the opposite. I've heard that they are loaded up with gowns now. And, initially we had nothing. We had empty cupboards. We had empty shelves. We had nothing because it wasn't put there by the last administration. And I've heard that we have, I just saw it yesterday, where they're making millions of masks a month in a factory from, in that case, it was Arizona. That's great. We have other factories being built now for masks. And for the most part, that was fine, but I've heard we have tremendous supply to almost all places.
Not sporadic.
Tremendous supply, to a point where we're going to start having some of our supply go to other countries, which need it very badly.
This guy is a delusional, disgusting brat, and he cannot even accept somebody on the front lines who's doing a job, who's saving. For every life that the Trump administration is costing through greed and incompetence, this woman is directly participating in saving. And it can't be one-to-one, obviously, because of the power differential. But this guy cannot, if he can throw a little controlled tantrum like that over a frontline responder who's saving people's lives, making the most mild, not even a criticism, just saying, hey, we need a little bit more of these resources. Of course, this is the same guy that's going to throw a tantrum when he has bad poll numbers, but this is somebody who is going to, as an example, shelve a CDC report on how to safely reopen the country because he's having daily fits because he can't brag about his economy anymore. This stuff was so leaned into by a certain sector of people that they missed basically doing political analysis because they just were personally fixated on Trump. And everybody, I think, understands why I think that's a foolish strategy and not effective in actually beating Trump, which in fact is incredibly important. If you balance it out and you don't fall for every, don't have a meltdown about every tweet, you're able to have an analysis of the actual policy set of the Republican Party and not just fixate on one person, reduce that noise by 80%, but still take 10, 20% to say, and, especially in an example like that this guy's just pathetic. That's just so fucking pathetic to have a little tantrum like that.
I'm honestly surprised he didn't attack her more as some sort of like fake news crisis actor, or not crisis actor, right? Because everything's fine, but like a hater or whatever.
Yeah, if he finds out that she's like a Hillary supporter or like did anything, he'll find a way to leak that to the press, I'm pretty sure.
Well, we don't even know. I mean, we're going to be hearing about this. I mean, it honestly reminds me, and I don't mean this to be trivial. I mean, like, really this guy's like process of, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago or something. There's a clip of Artie Lang roasting Trump at some event in Vegas. And it's funny. Artie has some very funny lines. And Trump does the thing. I mean, he definitely does the weird, like, handshake thing where he pulls Artie or whatever, but it's all like, that's very funny, you did a good job, great. Several years later or a year later, but some an amount of time, he's on the Howard Stern show, and out of nowhere Trump's just like, I don't like this guy, because Artie's the co-host, or and this guy's a loser. He did the roast, totally disrespectful, low class. I mean, and this is back in like Donald Trump being part of the whack pack on Howard Stern, and he's not happy. I mean, he's, and so, no, we don't, I agree with you, Jamie, but I think, he had some sense of how to temperament, but the meltdown about this woman could still be coming on Twitter, I mean, he'll, and I'm sure he's whining behind closed doors about it. And that is where, again, on a policy level, getting rid of pandemic preparedness, that's Republican policy. That was a John Bolton idea. Having completely collapsed public health infrastructure is a Republican and project that overlaps with much of the neoliberal project. All of those have to be at the forefront. And you cannot dismiss the equation of having a uniquely toxic, narcissistic individual in a situation like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's up, but we saw the video of the Wisconsin Supreme Court justice yesterday. Just
there you go.
Total like grade A lunatic, right? Like,
yes.
Saying making people stay at home is like Korematsu. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, these people are fucking damn.
They're all like, Trump is it's a weird balance to try to say, because Trump is totally gone, and then that's the entire bench that they got too, just completely lunatic.
Well, he's the perfect manifestation of the Republican Party. That's why anybody who knew anything should have known he would obviously win the 2016 primary. In addition to being a better performer and everytum else.
They love him.
Speaking of which, look what shirt I have on.
Let me see.
My Jeb Bush. Style and
poor old Jeb.
It's the Mark Halperin grades from the first debate.
Poor sad old Jeb.
Didn't turn out that way, folks.
Oh man, that was so intense.
That's so long ago, Jeb Bush.
Oh, according to the memes, he's gonna have a second life as some sort of Marxist-Leninist freedom fighter.
Yeah, his memes really did pop off for a bit.
So, do you remember the time where the guy was just at some like breakfast in Nashua or something, and the dude just cut him very rudely? Jeff was at some breakfast. Breakfast
I'm
thing.
done.
Yeah. No. He's like they're kicking me out the door. No, it was honestly, it was like, you can't let this guy have an extra 5 minutes. Nope. Strict time limits at the Lions Club or whatever it was. It was like he couldn't even
bingo.
He was so traumatized. He's so like, I don't know. Yeah.
You guys got a pancake breakfast, or I don't want to stand in the way of
it. I don't want to stand in the way of anybody's pancake breakfast. Of course, there are a problem with equipment. There is a problem with equipment and protection for nurses across the board. I mean, not only just in hospitals, obviously, but I mean, you should hear the horrifying stories about nursing homes. And I have a friend whose parent works in a nursing home. It's terrifying across the board, in particular for nurses who can't even, how are they going to distance, in a job like that? So this is a protest that we should be backing very strongly. This is nurses from National Nurses United protesting and holding up 88 pairs of shoes for the 88 nurse deaths during the first couple of months of the pandemic.
They were committed to protecting others from the ravages of illness and being that voice, that advocate for their patients. But who was there protecting these nurses? How many of these nurses worked in the hospitals that were long on patients but short on N95 respirators? How many of these nurses were failed by chaotic and haphazard protocols, which left them vulnerable to exposure and illness? How many of these nurses died because this administration, this Congress, our elected officials, our government agencies failed to act, to lead, and to protect them? We stand here today, our hearts full of pain, but also with determination and demanding action. It is past time for this president and Congress to act.
Nothing to add to that. Let's hear a lot more and amplify those protests and all other organized labor. I mean, what they set up there in terms of observing the social distancing, but still taking the physical risk, which they take every day by the nature of their jobs. And the visual of that is extremely powerful, that they came out coordinated in terms of color, in terms of how they set it up. It's a really powerful demonstration, just even on a visual level. And of course, there's nothing from the White House. There's nothing from Trump, but having a little bit of a tantrum when a nurse points it out to him around him. And the leadership in Congress and across the board is a failed. I mean, we are functioning as a failed state when it comes to anything outside of propping up the banks and financial sector. I mean, this is, and partially that's by design. I mean, we've talked about this, that the Fed can get money and liquidity into the banking sector very easily, and to other and to corporations that operate at scale. Even the Small Business Administration is not bureaucratically equipped to deliver resources in the way it needs to do to save small businesses. And that $1,200 is running out for folks. The, safeguards in terms of payroll running out. There's critical, nurses are under threat every single day. They do not have the equipment and protections they need. The testing kits are not there. And grocery store workers are dying. Delivery people, I mean, this is all still happening. And the drumbeat to reopen, quote unquote, reopen, which is even taken in its own terms as delusional. It completely does not recognize the social reality, like people's changed behavior. Nouriel Roubini, I really would recommend people listen to him on Bloomberg, who's an economist who was certainly ahead of the curve in predicting the Wall Street crash of 2008. And he was saying, like, look, this is an assault on labor, which is bad structurally. It's another deepening of loss of jobs and wages. It's going to expand people in temp work. It's going to have an inflationary effect because you're just pumping money into the financial system, and then, potentially have an inflationary effect. And then, and most importantly for this, you're just not acknowledging that the problem here isn't that things aren't open and people are jonesing to get out and do things. The polls do show that most people want to be in quarantine because most people don't want to die or have a family member die, or just even go through the process of getting sick for several weeks. That's also pretty awful. And most people also kind of, in terms of their economic lives, don't have the capacity to be sick like that because we don't have a social infrastructure in this country. So all that is happening. The nurses are out demonstrating. Please support the nurses. Please, as much as you can, focus your social media attention on that protest.
Yeah, amplify it too, because
that's very important to amplify.
The other bullshit reopen protests, you know that they're going to get amplified by all types of cable media. So amplify this stuff on your like Facebook and those sorts of channels where you reach the normal people in your life. We need to be in charge of this moment, I guess.
Yeah. And the more the word gets out, the more other people will hopefully jump on to this movement in the same way that the mainstream media might do a bad thing and actually pull working class people into the reopen protests in a way that would not be constructive. We can do the good version of that. We can amplify the ways that normal working people are standing up for their rights all over the country and all over the world. And it's spreading. There's actually a Wikipedia page now on all of the strike actions that have happened since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is a real phenomenon, and it's growing.
Yeah, and we're talking to the directors at the National Nurses United to get some of them on this program. So
awesome.
Watch here.
Oh, hell yeah.
Oh, that's really, really good. And this is also my point here. That what you do is you identify, because if you can't look dispassionately at something like the reopen protests, you will miss the areas where people with disgusting politics can exploit vulnerabilities. So you have to be able to look at things somewhat dispassionately. If scolding and moralizing people worked, then Hillary Clinton's about to be reelected president. You have to have the capacity to say, what is it that they are speaking to, even if it's 5% of why they're there, that is valid or legitimate. Then you need to highlight all the other elements of what they're doing that are innately toxic. And by the way, they've made that very easy in the last couple of weeks. The first reopen protests were much, and I don't know what happened, but the first reopen protests, they've always had this crazy and extremist element. But there was they were communicating enough of, I just need to get back to work, that it was a much more threatening message. They have gone, the last couple of weeks, they've come out and been like, we're going to do, we're going to do racist blackface shows. We're going to do the Nazi Confederate flags, the guns, all of that. And again, I don't think that there is a silent majority for that. I don't. I actually think most people, including people that would definitely not consider themselves on the left and are normies, actually find that kind of fascist, racist cosplaying embarrassing and repulsive, because it is. And that's why Fox News was trying to discipline their people, obviously not on moral grounds, but on visual and strategic grounds, to not show up like that. So anyways, you dispassionately look at what people can appeal to that is legitimate, the concern about making money in this time. Then you zero in and hit at their vulnerabilities, like the AstroTurf funding. And then, and I would say at this point, 3 weeks ago, I'm someone saying take reopen seriously and try to have a serious analysis of it in case it takes off. And now I'm saying, like, look, if somebody shows up and they do something dangerous or something that can make them look particularly bad, I'll highlight it and talk about it. But besides that, I'm actually pretty bored and uninterested. And I want to take my time to talk about the nurses' protests and the rent strikes and the Amazon workers and the Target workers, because these are the most important things happening anyways. They are happening. And we do need to counteract the fact that these right-wing demonstrations have built-in political and media advantages. So that's my sort of three-step process. Because I realize, like, when you do shows like this, sometimes it certain things can appear like contradictions, which aren't really. But at any rate,
and I should also add that de Blasio and the police commissioner just announced that we are not allowed to have protests in New York City for the duration of this thing, which, I get it. They think it's always a risk, even if you're observing the 6-foot rule and wearing PPE. But, like, stop giving us things to protest about, right? Like, if you can force nurses to go to work without adequate equipment, you cannot tell them not to stand outside that place of work and protest.
That's exactly right. If safety is number one, then safety is number one.